When I was 8 years old, I got a perfect score on a math test and ran home to show my parents. My mom was in the living room watching my sister do a cartwheel. She glanced at my paper, said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to clapping for the cartwheel. That was the moment I understood how things worked in our house. My sister. I'll just call her my sister because honestly her name doesn't even matter in this story. Was 4 years younger than me and had been the sun of our family's solar system since the day she arrived. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe weather. It rained a lot that year. My parents loved her more. Just facts. I was the responsible one. The one who didn't need reminding to do homework. Who learned to cook dinner at 12 because my mom was busy driving my sister to dance rehearsals. Who got a part-time job at 16 and started saving for college without being asked. My parents took pride in me the way people take pride in a reliable car. It starts every time. Never worry about it. Move on. By the time I left for college at 18, I had taught myself to need less. Less validation, less attention, less space in rooms where I always seemed to take up too much or too little. Never the right amount. I got a scholarship. Paid for the rest myself. Graduated in 4 years, got a job at an accounting firm in the city, rented a small apartment with good light and a fire escape where I grew tomatoes in the summer. I built a quiet, steady life. And I was proud of it, even when no one else seemed to notice. My parents called when they needed something. Usually it was my sister, circling back into their orbit after some crisis. A breakup, a job that didn't work out, a situation that needed money or a place to stay. They'd call me to ask if I could contribute. Help out. Be the bigger person. I always did because I had convinced myself that being useful was the same as being loved. The holidays were the proving ground for all of this. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter. I drove 3 hours to my parents' house, brought food, cleaned up, smiled through dinners where my sister got asked about her dreams, and I got asked about my 401k. I laughed at the right moments. I helped my mom with the dishes. I drove home Sunday night in the dark and told myself it was fine. It was just how things were. The year I turned 29, my sister moved back home. Officially this time, not just for a few weeks, but with her bedroom repainted and a parking spot cleared in the driveway. She'd been through another rough patch, the details of which were kept vague when relayed to me as though I might judge. I wouldn't have. But I also wasn't asked. What I was told, in a cheerful phone call from my mom, was that my sister had adopted a dog. A big one. A Bernese mountain dog named something I've already forgotten. The point is, he was enormous, and he shed constantly, and he lived in the house full time, which mattered to me because of something my parents had known since I was a teenager. I have a severe allergy to dog dander. Not the sneezing kind. Not the itchy eyes and take a Claritin kind. The kind where my airways tighten and I've ended up in urgent care twice, once at 15 and once at 22. My parents were in the room both times. They knew the paperwork, the prescriptions, the look on my face when it starts. They knew. My mom told me about the dog, like she was announcing good news, which I suppose for everyone else in that house it was. I said carefully that I was happy for my sister, but I needed to ask, where would the dog be when I visited for the holidays? There was a pause. "Well, honey, he lives here," she said. "I know. I'm asking if there's a plan. Like if he can stay at a neighbor's or if I can." "He's not used to strangers yet. He gets anxious." I let that sentence sit between us for a moment. "Mom, I'm allergic. You have your inhaler." That was the conversation. That was the whole thing. I told myself I'd figure it out. I made an appointment with my allergist, got a stronger prescription, read forums about pre-medicating before exposure. I wanted to come home for Thanksgiving. I had made that drive for 11 years. I told myself one more year with better preparation was manageable. I arrived on a Wednesday evening. The dog greeted me at the door before my parents did. Within 40 minutes, I knew it was bad. My chest was doing that tight, underwater thing. My eyes were streaming. I excused myself to use my inhaler, came back to the table, tried to eat the bread my mom had made, the kind I used to ask for every holiday, and couldn't taste anything because I was focused entirely on breathing evenly. My sister asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. She went back to feeding the dog scraps under the table. By 10 o'clock, I told my parents I was having a reaction and I needed to leave. My dad said, "Already?" Like I had somewhere better to be. My mom said maybe I should have taken my medication sooner. My sister said she was sorry, but the dog couldn't sleep somewhere else because he wasn't crate trained yet. I drove myself to a motel 20 minutes away, took a double dose of everything I had, sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and called my best friend, who listened to the whole thing without saying a word until I was done. "Are you going back tomorrow?" she asked. I said I didn't know. I went back Thursday. Thanksgiving itself. Told myself it was important. Took everything my allergist had given me. Lasted 4 hours before the reaction came back harder. I could feel my throat starting to close. Just at the edges, that specific terrifying sensation I've spent years learning to identify before it becomes an emergency. I told my parents I needed to go to the ER. My mom looked at my sister. My sister looked at the dog. My dad said, "Are you sure it's that bad?" I said yes. I said I needed someone to drive me because I didn't trust myself on the highway. My sister said she couldn't leave because the dog needed to go out. My dad said he'd had 2 glasses of wine. My mom said she supposed she could drive me, but she'd need to be back for dessert. I stared at them. Then I picked up my bag, took my keys, and drove myself to the emergency room. I sat in a plastic chair for 2 hours with my chest tight and my eyes swollen and my hands shaking just slightly, the way they do when I've spent too long pretending I'm fine. A nurse took my vitals and asked if there was anyone to call. I said no. She gave me a look I won't forget. The kind that's professional but has something else underneath it, and she brought me a warm blanket without asking. They kept me for observation until midnight. I slept in that chair for most of it. My phone showed 3 texts from my mom asking when I'd be back for pie. I didn't answer. When I was discharged, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for a while. It was cold. The lot was almost empty. I could see the highway from where I was parked, the red taillights of other people going home or away. I couldn't tell which. I thought about the cartwheel. I thought about 11 years of Thanksgivings and Christmases and Easters, the dishes I washed and the food I brought and the money I sent when things got tight, the phone calls I answered at inconvenient times, the 3-hour drive both ways that I never complained about because I had been taught very thoroughly that needing things was a burden and providing things was the price of belonging. I thought about my mom saying, "You have your inhaler," like that was a reasonable response to her daughter's medical history. And I made a decision, not out of anger. It's the thing people always assume, that moments like this come from rage, from finally snapping, from revenge. It wasn't like that. It felt almost quiet, like something that had been slowly pressurizing for years just released. I wasn't going to keep doing this. I drove back to my parents' house. The lights were still on. I could see the shape of the dog moving past the window. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, then went inside, nodded at everyone in the living room like nothing had happened, and went upstairs to the guest room. I sat at the small desk under the window and I wrote a letter. I wrote it carefully, the way I do everything. Precisely, without unnecessary words. I said I loved them and I meant it. I said I knew the holidays mattered and I had shown up for everyone, even this one. I said I had driven myself to the emergency room alone tonight because everyone in that house had a reason they couldn't come, and I was not writing this letter to punish anyone for that. I was writing it because I needed them to understand what tonight meant. It meant I had my answer. The answer to the question I had been asking my whole life without knowing how to say it out loud. I wrote, "I am not asking you to love me more than you love her. I know that ship has sailed, and honestly, I made my peace with it somewhere around age 12. But I'm asking you to love me at least as much as you love her dog. And tonight you showed me you don't." I wrote, "I will not be coming home for Christmas or for Easter. I will not be making the drive and bringing food and sitting at the table and pretending this is a family that sees me. Maybe someday things will look different, but right now they don't, and I am done arranging my health around a dog that doesn't know my name." I wrote, I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. I mean that, I really do. I folded the letter, I put it on the nightstand. I packed my bag, which wasn't hard because I had never fully unpacked it, I realize now, never fully unpacked it in that house. And I went downstairs. My mom was in the kitchen cutting pie. She looked up, saw my bag, and said, "Are you leaving?" I said, "Yes." She said, "But it's almost midnight." I said I knew. She said she didn't understand why I was being dramatic about this. I told her there was a letter upstairs. I told her she could read it whenever she wanted, there was no rush. Then I walked to the door, put on my coat, and left. I drove home. 3 hours, empty highway, the radio playing something low that I don't remember. I got back to my apartment at 3 in the morning, made tea, sat on my couch, and looked at my tomato plants on the fire escape, dead for the winter, just the bare sticks of them in their pots, and I felt something I had to sit with for a while before I could name it. Peace. Just quiet, exhausted, imperfect peace. My mom called twice the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. My dad sent a text that said, "Your mother is upset." My sister sent nothing. 3 days later, my mom called again and I answered. She said the letter was unfair. She said I had always been sensitive. She said the dog wasn't going anywhere and she didn't see why I couldn't work around it. She said my sister was going through a hard time and they were just trying to support her. She said she hoped I would reconsider missing Christmas. I listened. I didn't argue. When she was done, I said, "I'm not angry, Mom. I just meant what I wrote." There was a long pause. She said, "So you're really not coming?" I said no. She said she didn't know what I expected her to do. I said I didn't expect her to do anything. That was sort of the whole point. We hung up and I stood in my kitchen for a while holding my phone. Then I put it down and made breakfast. Eggs with the last of the tomatoes I'd preserved in jars from my summer plants and toast and coffee. I sat at my own table in my own apartment, in the city I had moved to and built a life in without asking anyone's permission or help. And I ate slowly. Christmas came. I stayed home. My best friend came over and we made soup and watched old movies, and at some point in the evening, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours, which had not happened on a single holiday in the past decade. It felt like putting down something very heavy that I had been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. My parents did not come around in some dramatic moment of realization. There was no phone call where my mom cried and said she finally understood. Real life doesn't usually do that. My dad sent a card in January with a gift card inside and a note that said, "We miss you," which was nice, and I appreciated it, and it didn't change anything. My sister texted in February. She said she thought I was being unfair to the whole family. I said I understood she felt that way. She didn't respond after that. I kept going to my therapist, which I'd started 6 months before the Thanksgiving incident, already knowing, I think, that something was coming. I kept showing up to my job. I kept growing things on my fire escape. I called my best friend on Sundays. I built small routines that held me up. Quiet architecture no one else could see. And slowly, in the way that things do when you stop fighting the truth of them, I started to feel like myself. Like the version of me that won the math test at 8 and was proud of it before she learned that pride needed to be rationed. I don't know what happens next with my family. Maybe nothing. Maybe something. I'm not holding my breath and I'm not closing every door. I just know that I spent 29 years arranging myself around people who didn't notice the arranging, and I'm not doing it anymore. The last thing I wrote in that letter, the part I debated cutting because it felt too raw, was this: I needed you to choose me, not instead of her, not instead of the dog, not instead of the pie or the wine or the dessert. Just once. Just to show me that my name on the caller ID meant someone would get up from the table. You didn't. And now I'm choosing myself, because someone has to. I meant every word. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Thanksgiving. Not in a dramatic way. Just the quiet, honest way you do when you finally stop running from something you've known for a long time. Here's what I've come to understand. The people who end up alone at the edges of their own families are almost never there by accident. Someone taught them, very early, that their needs were the inconvenient kind. And so they learned to shrink. They learned to arrive already apologizing, to leave without making a scene, to absorb whatever they were given and call it enough. I learned all of that. I was a very good student. But here's the other thing I've learned, and this one took longer, cost more, and nobody handed it to me in a lesson. The way people treat you is information. It's not judgment. It's not the final word on your worth. It's just data. And what you do with that data is entirely up to you. My parents didn't come to the emergency room because, on some level, they had been making that same calculation for 29 years. She handles it. She doesn't need us. She'll be fine. And the terrible thing is, they weren't wrong. I had always been fine. I had made myself fine so thoroughly, so consistently, that they had no reason to believe tonight was different. That's not their fault, and it's not mine either. It's just what happens when someone spends long enough making themselves small. Eventually, people stop checking the corners of the room where you've been standing. What I did with that letter was the first honest thing I'd done in that house in maybe a decade. I didn't perform it. I didn't dress it up or soften it for their comfort. I wrote the truth, plainly, completely, without leaving myself a way to take it back. And then I left. And the act of leaving, of driving home at 3 in the morning to my own apartment and my own life, was the clearest demonstration I had ever given of what I actually believed about myself. That's what I think about when people ask if I regret it. The answer is no. Not because everything worked out perfectly, because it hasn't, not in any tidy way. My family is still my family, complicated and imperfect and not particularly changed. But I am changed. That's the part that matters. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, slowly, out of every moment you decided to keep going when it would have been easier to collapse. Every year I paid my own tuition. Every holiday I drove 3 hours and smiled through dinner. Every time I filed the difficult feelings somewhere private and showed up anyway. That was not weakness. That was practice. I just didn't know yet what I was practicing for. I was practicing for the moment I would finally need to choose myself, clearly and without apology, in a way that could not be undone. The letter was the result of all of it. Every bit of intelligence I had spent on understanding my family, every ounce of moral clarity I had slowly built about what love actually looks like in practice, every strand of resilience I had woven out of hard years. It all came together in those 2 pages I left on the nightstand. I don't know what my family does with that information. That part isn't mine to control. What I know is that I finally stopped pretending the corner of the room was a fine place to stand. And I walked out into the rest of my life. It's quieter here. I like it.